Thank you, boxing fans around the world, for joining us once again as we discuss the hot topics in boxing, especially those related to the heavyweights. Today, we're going to talk about Lennox Lewis. And just like I did yesterday, let's refer to someone else's opinion first. This is according to Ring Magazine and their article that appeared in their September 2015 issue. Lennox Lewis was the only third heavyweight champion to defeat every opponent he ever faced, including rematches against those who beat him, and the last man to be considered the undisputed king of the glamour division. The 6'5" Colossus and chess wizard strategically decimated a heavyweight landscape populated by top opposition, and in a world of blood and guts, stood relatively unblemished on a throne that he always proclaimed was his destiny. A brilliant amateur career culminated in a gold medal at the Seoul Olympics in 1988, and despite representing his adopted country of Canada in the unpaid ranks, Lewis elected to turn professional in his native England in 1989. Now, just for fun, if you would like, unless you want to comment anything right then and there, I will run by a list of top 10 contenders.
All representing Jamaica. Yes, that's about it. For the moment, yep.
Yeah, okay, all righty. So, here we go. Well, let me find it first. Where the heck did it go? In the heavyweight division. Oh, I see they do pound for pound. Ah, cool. All righty. In the top heavyweights, according to SportBible, okay, as of right now, as of today, number 10, they're ranking Michael Hunter, whose record is 20 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw with 14 knockouts. Luiz Ortiz, who's won 32, 27 by knockout, lost 2, and none drawn. Joyce has a record of 13 wins, 12 by knockout. And why do I see no losses and no draws? Oh, well, someone else can figure that one out. Oleksandr Usyk comes in at 18 wins, 13 knockouts. I love the math. No draws, no losses. Anyway, Joseph Parker comes in at number 6 with 29 wins, 21 knockouts, 2 losses, no draws. Andy Ruiz Jr., 36 wins, 22 knockouts, and 2 losses. Dillian Whyte comes in number 4 with 28 wins, 19 by knockout, 2 losses, no draws. Deontay Wilder is in, top 3. So he's number 3 with 42 wins, 41 by knockout, 1 loss, 1 draw. So it's not up to date. And number 2, Anthony Joshua with 24 wins, 22 by knockout, 1 loss. And of course, number 1, Tyson Fury, who's won 30 by the time this was written, I suppose, with 21 knockouts and 1 draw. Rightio, on we go then. So our question today is Lennox Lewis in his prime. Would he be able to beat any of these contenders? Starting with any of those among the, shall we say, the bottom ranks?
First thing I'm going to say is it's a simple one. Hell yeah, absolutely. The one thing, it is off topic, which is my speciality, as you were counting down as top 10, was the more we talk day by day, the less inspired I am with all these fighters now. You know, they spoke about the lost years, the years after Muhammad Ali, where you had Larry Holmes, who was dominant, but apart from Larry Holmes, with the other belts that become belts, they were passed literally from heavyweight to heavyweight. They were on average holding it for one defense, or just winning it, then losing it on the first defense. That was the 80s. Obviously, you had the Muhammad Ali leaving, so it was unfair because Larry Holmes was very dominant and he made many defenses. But when you think of, that was considered a bad era. Now, this is, I think, a very bad era. I think it's worse than the 80s, personally. Somebody said, I think even on the chat, that 90s heavyweights were different. Bloody hell, yes, they were. Completely different. They do not measure up. Now, the only one out of them, you're talking about Deontay Wilder against anybody ever is going to have that one punch lucky shot, if you want to put it that way. that's somebody that's always going to be in there. You're going to have Tyson Fury that is regardless against anybody because of the height, whether it be version 1, up to Klitschko, or version 2, this huge behemoth, which is, finished Wilder off, whichever one would have given anybody in history an argument. That aside, there isn't much else. Enter Lennox Lewis, today's topic, and I just shake my head. Who, how, what? Who can actually give him a stiff fight? And the answer is, really, any of them? Okay, instead of going from 10 down to 1, I'm going to go down from 1 upwards and then just pick on the rest because that's very quick at the end. Okay, the number 1 at the moment, the general consensus is that is Fury. He will give anybody a run for their money, especially, in my view, the version 1, the one that went in with Klitschko, that outpointed him, that could slip, move, bob, weave, tall, long reach, quick, fast, says it all with him. I think that was the better version of Tyson as a fighter, but he needed to be heavier, obviously, for 2 reasons, because of the Wilder side of things, because he needed to be an immovable object to better take the punches that he was given. Plus, as well, as I said, would it be yesterday? Would have been, Tuesday night. It would have been yesterday, where I think that the weight is up because that is right for how his body is at the moment, having lost. I must check actually how much exactly it was, but it was in the region of 8 stone. You cannot go from 8 stone down to a previous fighting weight and expect to, perform in the same way. Whether that be reflexes, punch, okay, we'll put that aside. Strength, the big one. And that was obviously echoed and highlighted by John Fury after the Otto fight. Now, the boxer Fury would have given Lennox Lewis fits. He would have given anybody fits. Who would have won that? I hate sitting on the fence, and I hate, it's a good one. You can see, you can play it out in your mind. You can see Fury running. I think Fury would beat most of them, but to beat, to do what he did, I'm just trying to imagine in my mind. This is why I'm taking a bit of time to come up with the answer. I'm just, picturing him now with the 40-year-old Vladimir who he beat. Now, as much as I'm saying that he was great, that's the best version of him, I'm sorry, but the Lennox Lewis of the 90s was far better than a 40-year-old Vladimir. Now, if Vladimir was younger, I'd still have to favour, Lennox Lewis with that one. And I know, as we've said before, A beats B, B beats C, C beats D, C beats D, but A can't beat D. Boxing doesn't work like that with styles and all the rest of it. But, with those things considered, I think Lennox would take it. But, Fury on any given day would give anybody a fit. Now, anybody else? As far as Joshua, no chance. As far as Usyk goes, I think Lennox is too much of a complete fighter for Usyk to not be able to make advantage of the mistakes, because Lennox didn't make many mistakes. As you said earlier, with the cutout, as you said, from 2015, it's a point I was going to bring up. But yes, he has beaten every single person that has beaten him. And they were, because it's heavyweights, I don't think Lennox was chinny, because he was in some tremendous battles and he's withstood some big punches, but he was caught by a lucky punch when he wasn't concentrated fully. Obviously, the first loss was Oliver McCall. You then had Hazim Rahman. That was it. There's 2 losses. And he avenged both, the Oliver McCall one in very strange ways. If you remember that fight where Oliver McCall literally had a nervous breakdown in the fight, and it was waved off eventually, something like 7 or 8, whatever the round was, after McCall just pacing, crying his eyes out. He had or has psychological problems. Now, Hazim Rahman won. It's difficult. I hate saying a lucky punch, but it was just a well-placed punch. Heavyweights are heavyweights. Hazim Rahman was a good puncher. Lennox was on the end of it. He was knocked out. But the way in which he avenged it, it's not like, for example, and I'm going to beat up AJ here, where he lost to Andy Ruiz, and then sort of the rematch is him sort of like being petrified, legging it away from Ruiz, and Ruiz effectively losing, as good as losing the fight as well, because he came in like some beached whale. Now, he didn't sort of beat Rackman in that way. It was an absolute beating, finished off by a beautiful knockout. That is how you avenge a defeat. That fighter, that was his peak. He was bigger than earlier in his career with the first loss with Oliver McCall, and the first thing that Manny Stewart did with Lennox after Lennox went from who was his trainer, Pepe Correa at that point. Now he left Correa, who was pretty much just a glorified cheerleader. He went to Manny Stewart, he put weight on, and he taught him, as he does with big heavyweights, like he did with Vladimir, etc., of how to use a big frame, a tall frame, long arms. As much as he's not 6'9" or 6'7", what was Lewis? 6'4", 6'5"?
6'4".
6'4".
6'5", I think these guys said in the Ring magazine.
Yeah, around that. That is big, and that was considered tall and big back then.
Yeah, 6'5".
Yeah. Still not 6'7", it's still not 6'9", for God's sakes.
Right,
it's going crazy now, but it appears it's going to be the way it's going. Who knows, in 20 years' time, we'll have a fluid person that's 7'2", like the Russian guy. Leave that one there. Lennox was, to me, the complete package, and the one thing I do regret is not fully appreciating his career while it was unraveling. I don't know why I did. I don't know if I was just too wrapped up in Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson at the time. I followed his career. I even saw one of his fights ringside early on when he won the European Championship against Jean Chanay. That was in London, Crystal Palace, which is no more. Moving up the rank, there's nobody else. There's nobody else at all. He was a complete fighter. He ticked every box. Now, the only thing he was possibly guilty of was switching off sometimes. And you could probably throw at him that the last fight he came in out of shape as such against Vitaly Klitschko. But bear in mind, when he went in with Vitaly Klitschko, there was a lot of things going on. He had just recently he'd just done some filming with something, and there was a lot of things going on, and you call them excuses or being fair justifications. But he was at the end of his career. He wasn't his best. He wasn't in shape. Maybe he was struggling, in camp as such. He lost the fight. But the best thing he ever did, and something that I've got so much respect for so far, is he retired when exactly the time was right. Not on the back of a beating or a KO loss against somebody that he should have, beaten or would have beaten 5 years, prior, with one hand behind his back, etc. No, he got out, in a subpar performance. He still came out on top just against Vitaly Klitschko. Maybe a little bit fortunate that you had the huge gashes on Klitschko's eyes. But then again, a lot of people attribute that. It's a shame about that, because if that didn't happen, Klitschko would have won the fight. No. It's not the case if it wasn't a butt that opened up those cuts. They were punches. That was courtesy of Lennox Lewis. So he won that fight. It was close. A rematch, I would have favored Vitaly, because he was the fighter that was improving, going up when you had Lennox Lewis going down. His career was fantastic. Again, avenging every loss. I know of no other fighter that's done that. I know, God, who did up until Fury. That was, of course, Wilder. No, it wasn't even a loss. Sorry, that was the one person that actually went the distance with him, Bermain Stavern. That was changed. I don't know of any fighters that have actually retired, and every single loss has been reversed. Ali, no. Was up until a certain point, but you had the last Larry Holmes fight, and you had the last one, which was against Trevor Berbick. He's good. He's great. All-time great. Top 5 ever. Absolutely. Top 3, arguable. Those fighters from the 90s, it was a very good era. And I don't know why as well. Maybe it's just something that was running over from the 80s. Fighters in the 90s didn't get their full respect. It was so weird. I don't get it. There were some marvelous fights. There were some marvelous fighters. Holyfield was fantastic. Tyson, even in version 2, even in version 3, out of jail, was very good, even if he was a shadow of his former self. But Lennox Lewis beat Holyfield twice. He beat Tyson at the end of his career. I know Holyfield, by the way, was coming to the end of the career. He was on the slide. That would have been very interesting with both of them at the peaks, because at that point, Lewis was at his peak. Maybe it would have been a very, very, very close fight if Holyfield was not so much on the slide. Beat Tyson at the end of his career. Again, that is one fight that I would have loved to have seen. It's a shame the bout never materialized with Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis. As it appears, it was Lennox Lewis that wanted to fight. Bowe wanted to dodge it, hence the putting the belt, the WBC belt, in the trash can. He was avoided. Now nobody will touch him. None of them. You've got Fury that stands a chance. Usyk, I don't think. No, there's nothing that I don't think Usyk can do that would, because there isn't a major weakness in Lennox. I don't think there's even a weakness. There's nothing glaring for somebody to make use of the faults. Because what's going to happen is, I think that AJ is still going to lose in the rematch with Usyk, but I think it's going to be closer. I think, again, with that fight, I think it's going to be AJ that's going to be able to improve more. So looking at that fight, AJ is nowhere near Lennox Lewis's capabilities as a fighter, nowhere near it. So based on that, with that being very close, it's got to be a Lennox victory. Wilder, only if he's lucky. And the only other people you mentioned, that I can remember, you had Ortiz, absolutely no chance. You had Michael Hunter, ex-cruiserweight. No, it's not going to happen. Fighters in the 90s were much better, different class. There were a number of classy fighters that were top 10, top 5. Lennox, I think, just in my humble opinion, would have run over all of them, bar, Fury. I think it really, really stops there. I think, apart from that, Lennox all the way.
What about just before I go into that, bit of a sidebar. I think the reason you might have, as were many boxing fans, distracted, if you will, during the 90s was UFC. UFC was insanely popular and commanded all the media attention, quite frankly. So in the martial arts category, in general terms, I think that's what happened in the 90s. My personal opinion. What about a stocky puncher Dillian Whyte kind of guy these days?
Well, making comparisons with fighters, David Tua was stocky. He was a wrecking ball. I remember when he clocked, who was it? John Ruiz. Okay, made it as a champion. A bit of a negative fighter, and it was earlier in Ruiz's career. But Tua was flattened in, 19 seconds. There's no other fighter that managed to do that. David Tua was good, stocky. He was meant to be a second-rate poor man's Mike Tyson, and he didn't land a punch really on Lennox. It went the distance because, I don't think Tua was ever knocked out. I don't think he was ever stopped. I just saw something flash up the computer about Tommy Morrison, who was still handy at that point. He still had something left. Rest in peace, by the way. He tried, and that fight finished, what was it, 6th round, I think it was, 6th or 7th round. It was a dominant fight, performance from Lennox. I'm not a big, never really have been, for whatever reason, a huge flag waver for Lennox. And I was trying to work out why in the 90s I never was. I don't think it was the Canadian English thing, bearing in mind that would have affected me because I wasn't even living in the country at that time. Right. I don't know. I just think it was wrapped up with the other names. No, but Lennox all the way. I do fully appreciate, and the times I do get to see some fights, I'll always go back to one of his fights. The fantastic Gallotta display, the fantastic Michael Grant display. Well, a lot of displays were fantastic. He was very rarely in a bad fight. The only bad one he was ever in was with Henry Akinwande. In the end, Akinwande was actually disqualified for clutching onto Lennox. It was a horrible fight. But, Lennox couldn't do anything about it. If you have somebody who's 6 foot, what was Akinwande? He was 6'7", if I remember right. Lanky, and all he did was just clutch onto Lennox for dear life. That was awful. But that is the only bad fight I can remember Lennox being in. There wasn't anything. Early on in the career, he had a lot of promise. He had some good defeats. He beat Mike Weaver. This was really early on in his career. He had the big all British clash with unbeaten Gary Mason, rest in peace. That was like the equivalent of Joe Joyce and Daniel Thingy. The recent fight there is very crossroads bout, two unbeatens, both with a lot of promise. A bit of a flick a coin fight. Lennox won that. Mason's eyes were shut mid rounds. It was dominant display then, and this was all early. This was prior to winning the European. Was it? No, I think it was just after, actually, because he'd won the European. I think it was actually for, I think, the British title. I think in the European, maybe wrong with the British title, but it was for the European. That's after Lennox won it in Crystal Palace. Now, no, especially now. No, the crop. Every time we go through, okay, the top 10 according to whoever, it goes 10, 9. It's just when you actually think. I think last week I've got drawn into so much. Having watched that great fight where a not so good Fury meshed well with a not so good Wilder. For the reasons of weight and all the rest of it, as we discussed, it made for a great fight. But we do, as humans, get sucked in. And we think emotionally, and it was a great fight, great night. It was absolutely, you're like, this old Fury, great, great result, great this, great that. And you tend, and I did, lose context with how good his display actually was. But if you would have put him in at that point with, for example, a 90s, a top 90s fighter, would have been a completely different ball game. Wilder isn't Holyfield. Wilder isn't a lot of the other top fighters that Lennox did fight in his career. Different ball game. Now it's pretty crap. I've really, the more I think about it, the more I dissect, all these heavyweights and each one. And I think it's a very fair question. And again, I will argue the toss of this with anybody else. Whether it be Wilder, whether it be AJ, whoever, who exactly have they fought that's really credible or very credible? If it is a name that is on there, there will be something wrong with the name, i.e., at the end of their career, approaching 40 or even over 40, there'll be something wrong. And if you look at Holyfield's career, if you look at Lennox Lewis's career, if you look at Mike Tyson's career, the resume is completely different to any of these resumes now. Even I think Fury is great and he would do well against any fighter if the version one of him, blah, blah, blah. But it's awful now. It's awful now. People moaned about the 80s, maybe when we come out of this 10 years, the 20s, maybe it would be looked back in this negative way. But no, it's dire. Something needs to happen, really does. And I think when this happens, these fighters, you do need something like the brick clashes, even if it's not the best fighters out there. But you do need, I think, AJ versus Fury just to get some excitement back. You want Usyk, going against Fury, for example, for all the bouts. We need these things just to get pumping some interest into it, because the line of contenders with their resumes, how they are at this point in time, is bloody awful. No, it's, randomly pick anybody out in the top 15 and then go through the record. It's not very good.
Wow.
Just an opinion.
That's great. It's really good to see Big T back in the chat room. And he's mentioning Frank Bruno, and I heard him on an interview, and I couldn't believe how deep his voice was. I mean, let alone his physique. But I'm saying, wow, what an intimidating character that fella must have been in his day.
Bruno did very well. He was ahead of points against Lewis before Lewis caught him, clocked him, had him in the corner, and then finished him off. But it was very, it's a spirited effort from Bruno, but it was very typical from Bruno in a world title performance, because he'd done the same thing. I think it was ahead with Tim Witherspoon as well before getting clocked in late on in the fight. He was ahead against Bone Crusher Smith, his first loss, when he was clocked in the last round ahead of points. It was that, I think, actually was Frank Bruno's best performance. I know he won the title off of Oliver McCall, but Oliver McCall, I can't say mediocre fighter, but he won the title. He won it from Lewis by knocking him out with Lewis's first defeat. He then, the defenses. He defended against Larry Holmes, who was by then 40, 42, 41. Who else did he defend against? But then Bruno got it off of him. So, that was, what was that, third time lucky, fourth time lucky? Tyson, with a spoon. So that was fourth time lucky. But that was Frank Bruno's best performance, not winning a title, but, in running Lewis so close in what they deemed at the time, and it was called the Battle of Britain. And I don't know if you remember it clearly, what was on Frank Bruno's waistband. True Brit. What a dig at Mr. Lewis. Very good. Yep. True Brit.
Classic. That was classic.
Yeah. Yes. Very good. Very Bruno. It was. Yeah. I liked it. That was good. It was a good fight on a very wet night, if I remember right. But no, that was a good bout, his best display. But, Lewis, what was wrong with Lewis there? He wasn't switched on. He was undermotivated. I think, what's the term I'm looking for? Complacent. Taking, I think, Bruno easy. I think he just thought that, just one punch, Bruno be out of there. I think you underestimated him, because Bruno come out determined, and he really did want it. He did really well. He was because usually he was very stiff and very robotic, and he was jabbing very well, doubling, tripling the jab at points in the bout. He was, it was a very good performance. I think I could have summed that up maybe in one sentence instead of 20. So anyway.
Yeah, so just as another quick little sidebar, with respect, I don't know if you know this, Kristian, or not, but Big T's son is Ben Whitaker, who fought in the Olympics and did quite well. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. You asked me to think about this, and I have thought about this. I'm thinking about this super heavyweight division, and it occurred to me. This is what occurred to me. I'm saying to myself, when you get to the big boys, the 300-pounders, let's just say, is it really then at that point classified as boxing? Or are these guys, and I'm talking in terms of marketing references here, or are they sluggers? Or are they punchers? So is it a punching bout, or is it a boxing bout? You know what I mean? So this is what I was thinking, just over the past 24 hours since we talked about this. Because when we talk about boxing, we talk about the sweet science. We talk about the various elements, tangible and intangible, that these fighters have to either improve upon or recognize, and at least have some skills and ability, but notwithstanding the training. And then I thought to myself, if you're solely relying on height, weight as a factor to win a championship, are you actually truly boxing? So this is what I thought anyway, just in reference to our comments yesterday about the super heavyweight potential super heavyweight division on a professional level.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's, as we said, it's funny that, again, I will be very curious to see that if Fury fights again, what weight will he come in at? Because he's not going to come in at 277 again. All the little jokes of, body looks like, I don't know, a bag of milk or something. He was not as good as he was in the Wilder 2 fight, but I think that was just a bit of complacency mixed in with, the bad training. Sorry, I'll get my words right. Reports of bad training camp. It's that was right for Wilder to absorb the shots, but when that happens, he forsakes obviously what he had in version 1 against Klitschko. You can't box like that and punch. Is he going to go down in weight for? Let's say he was fighting somebody who was not a puncher like Wilder and was more of a boxer. Now, is he going to come in? Well, I should think he would have to come in lighter to box, to be able to catch the guy who's going to be giving him some movement, because coming in at 277 pounds against a mover, he'd get beaten, but then you got the issue now, and this is when it comes to the whole thing with Fury, with, losing all this weight. If he drops weight to become an effective boxer, is he then going to become weak as such, which was displayed obviously in his first fight with Wilder? That wasn't proper Fury, arguable then, and was very much the case with Otto Wallin. That bout might have really, you got Wallin fighting Whyte. That might have really flattered Wallin. Was Wallin that good, or was Fury in that fight actually that bad? I know he had the cut, which completely changes the perspective of a fight. I mean, the amount of worry that must have gone through his head, bearing in mind a lot of other referees another day would have waved that off.
Yeah.
You know, that was happening. You know, saw that, just like, okay, here we go. You know, this is the Wilder rematch out the window. You know, but he's been, oh God, has he been lucky? I think so, because going back to the first Wilder fight, he got clocked, he went down. 19 out of 20 referees would have stopped that fight without starting a count. Yes, Jack Reese did it, and it turns out to be either a very good or very bad bit of refereeing there, where it was good that he knew he would recover or started counting when he shouldn't really have started counting. But again, Fury was lifted by the gods up into his feet and miraculously back to how he was before, in the end winning that round, or certainly finishing it, being the aggressor. Strange, crazy. Bores? Anyway, that's another story. Not insinuating anything there, of course. He would have to come in lighter. I think this 377 was, you would never see, I don't think, Wilder be that weight again against another fighter. I think that was specifically done to negate Wilder's hard punches, so that he could then manhandle him like he did in the second fight, and which he kind of did, but not so effective in the third fight. Yeah, you know, so going back to your point now, if that is the way of heavyweights, it's going to go that way, because, you know, you've got Dillian Whyte, who's a big, heavy chap in a big unit. What is Dillian Whyte? Is he 19 stone, I think? You know, these are big boys.
Right.
Is this, you know, it's arguably with Dillian Whyte. I don't know the answer, but, you know, is this his best weight? 19 stone. You know, I'm not a trainer, but, you know, could he be better at 17 stone?
Right.
It's a good one. This weight issue, and it's something that I think we can only have the crystal ball out to gauge what is going to happen. But I think now with a few of these fights, I'm just so curious, always curious with fights, but so curious to just how it's going to turn out with who lands up beating who, but at what weights they are, and all these little things, because it's scratching my head with this one, because I think, you know, if Fury has to go in and box, he could be weight trained again, because you cannot stick 8 stone or take 8 stone off, and especially as he's in his 30s, because of, like I said yesterday about the fighters losing weight, it doesn't work and makes them weak and chinny. No, it hasn't happened to Fury yet, but it will do at some point. If he balloons up again in between fights, that's going to, you know, shorten his career. Not that I don't think he's ever going to have many fights anyway. Right. I think you see him in a ring probably 1 or 2 times maximum. That'll be it. But I'd be curious to see what the weight would be and how his performance would be. You know, is this just a lazy, complacent 277-pound bag of milk Tyson that would be in that shape for anybody, because he thinks that he'll either beat Usyk, who's just a cruiserweight, or AJ, who was beaten by Usyk, or, you know, take you know, Wilder now out the equation. There won't be a 4th fight, I don't think. I'm curious just to see what the mindset is. Is he going to believe in his own hype? Yes, he is probably the best fighter at the moment, so it's sounded a little bit cruel, but there is a little bit overhype with people looking at everything, engaging everything emotionally. I was one of them. No, interesting days ahead.
Absolutely. Did you happen to notice that comment from Big T? Boxing, according to the promoters and broadcasters, has become a sluggish sport. If you don't put them away, you're boring, or you're running, or you faltered.
He's a runner, yes. True. And a good example of that, and I know not everyone is going to agree with this. A lot of people labelled the Fury Klitschko fight boring, awful, one of the, you know, worst fights ever. Really? I cannot watch a boring boxing match a second time.
Right.
I've got too much time to put into doing other things. I've seen that fight probably about 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
Really did fully. What's the best word? I mean, just in awe of just what he did that night. That was just masterful. Yes, Klitschko was 40, but still had something to offer. Yes, maybe Klitschko was at the end of his career and there for the taking. But I don't think anybody less than Fury, I don't think, would have taken Klitschko at that point. Look how far Klitschko went with Anthony Joshua, and that was, what, a couple of years out of the ring? You know, the difference between 40 and 42 is a big difference as a fighter. You know, the one before would have been better. But the only thing is, and this is why a lot of people say that Fury come out of the rematch that was meant to be happening, that was announced and got to press conferences before he pulled out with issues, is the general consensus is, and I can see it, is that a lot of people said that come the latter rounds, Klitschko had Fury's number. He was doing better, and Fury was holding on at the end. But, that was labelled a boring fight. I completely disagree with that. And so going over to Big T's comment where it says, you know, you're running or you're this, that. Absolutely. It's really seen that way now. Especially as a heavyweight, if you're expected to knock people out.
Right.
You know, but, you know, look at Holyfield Bow 1. That went the distance. And, God, that was a huge slugfest. You don't have to have knockouts. You can have decisions without it being a concussive or absolute knockout in a fight. But it's Fury, that fight was one of the best ever. That Fury would have beaten, God, full circle back to that now. I'll stop it there because I tend to repeat about 4 times or 5 maybe. And before you know it, it's 2 minutes before your next show. I'll save you that today. What are we now? 39. So doing better so far if we cut short. But going back to the original point, Lennox Lewis all the way. Now, in the state of it, nobody would have touched him, I don't think. Fury, flip a coin, especially if he came in as that fleet-footed boxer. He had the chance there that he could probably go and snatch a decision. Maybe, but that's about it. If a 277 bag of milk went in there with him, 277-pound Fury went in there with him, that to me, unless you're Wilder or how are you, because of the weights, you know, for different fighters, etc. You know, that this 277-pound Fury, okay, he got by Wilder and was very, I was about to say lucky, not lucky, but he got past him in a great fight. But I wouldn't want to stay at 277 for the rest of the fighters, or for Usyk, for example, because that's a very big, more static target. And a thinking man like Usyk is one of the probably only heavyweights I've tipped to beat Fury. If you was the boxer with Klitschko, Fury all the way for me. But this heavier version, I think Usyk does actually stand a chance, only because of here. You know, he wouldn't go for the knockout. He would be planning a distance match, how to negate, obviously, the size of Fury, and he would find a way. The more I think about that, the more I think he has a big chance. But that is it, and that would have to be Fury at this heavier weight.
And, you know, we've said this before, and we've agreed. That's what makes this such a compelling sport. You don't really know what you're going to get until the end result is
That's
placed.
it.
Yeah.
And nobody can say categorically how a fight is going to go. You know, nobody can go, oh, you got it wrong, I got it right. Well, there's a little bit of luck there, because there could have been a little luck the other way around, where you can have somebody where it's going the way that it's supposed to go, and then it takes one punch and then it's reversed. As you say, you never know until it happens. And all plans and everything else can just very quickly go out the window. That is why we love it, especially the heavyweights. Or somebody at a lower weight that punches, not as powerful as heavyweight, but in respect, you know, like Beterbiev and fighters like that, the lower weights, you know, Inu. I love watching punch fights. Like you said earlier, finish any second. And that is something that Lennox Lewis did have, and that he did administer to many fighters during the 90s and early 2000s. Lennox all the way for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we say it often. Not you and I, but in the other shows that we do with other commentators, don't leave it in the hands of the judges. I mean, it's you're leaving a lot up in the air, quite frankly.
Especially in the UK at the moment. God, wouldn't be a visiting fighter coming over here. Used to have to skip Germany in the 90s. Now it's skip the UK. Jesus, no. Especially Mexico. No, keep away.
Fair enough.
Yep. No, that's it. That's for me, as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned. Lennox Lewis, all the way. Fury, the dancing version 1 against Klitschko would cause him problems, but nobody else, nowhere near. Different
So
animal, different everything. Class. One of the best ever.
one last quick little question then. Among the rising class of, let's just call them undefeated heavyweights, let's say the 10-0 type guys right now, are there any of those guys that come to mind that fit the mold of a Lennox Lewis?
Well, okay, let's go to some of the undefeateds. Joyce, good fighter. Problem with Joyce is that he's going to have a very short career if he carries on taking punches like he did in his last bout.
Right.
That was okay, and he's what is he? 30s, mid-30s. So if he carries on taking those flush, and bear in mind he's had a full amateur career, many fights, he's got to be careful. I rate him high, and like we said the other day, I do consider him as the boogeyman, but he's got to be careful. But with somebody like Lewis, who could move, who could punch, who was tall, so that negated some of the advantages that Joyce may have over some fighters, I think, that would have been a no-no, unless Joyce has got something just magical that just each and every fight he goes in, he manages to win one by the other. Well, he'll have a good run. He's up there with the mix, but, Usyk in the WSB, like the semi-pro thing, I don't know if you saw it, but they have fought properly with no head guards, and Usyk won the fight. Usyk showed there, I know it was just before turning pro, but Usyk there showed how you can beat Joyce. Because all you've got now is this, that Joyce has improved by a certain amount, and you just got Usyk that's improved by a certain amount. Look at that fight in there. Is it WSB it was called? The World... not WBS series boxing, whatever it's. I can send you the link. It's like semi-pro, no headgear and all the rest of it. Usyk showed how to beat Joyce. That the template is there, and arguably with Tony Yoka as well in the Olympics, even if that was a debated decision. And still, there's talk of Joyce may still even get the gold medal because there was supposed tampering in a number of the Olympics that's come out through an investigation, and as it appears, Joyce may get his gold medal yet. Does that mean they're going to take the gold medal off of Tony Yoka? It's one thing giving somebody a gold medal, saying, there we are, you should have got better, but taking it from somebody is a bit different. Let's see for that one. Who else is there? Hrgovic shows promise, but he hasn't fought anybody yet, as per all the rest of them. Right. When looking at him and what he's capable of, it's the case of looking at him with how he can possibly be against whoever, because if there's nothing proven there via any form of track record. He's got good promise. He seems to be on the less, I'm going to choose my words nicely here, less fluid side of things, a little bit robotic. Doesn't mean he's not going to be effective, because Vitaly Klitschko was tall, heavy puncher and robotic. As much as he looks similar to him facially, a bit of similarities there, I can see some similarities with style. Is he going to be another Vitaly Klitschko? Who knows? You don't know what he's going to be like, once he's had a punch, because he hasn't been punched yet. You cannot tell, and that's the problem with a lot of these people, which are, sort of whatever or the ones that's had one defeat on their career, like Daniel Dubois. He showed promise, but he had the loss to Joyce. He looked good, but under pressure, he may crack again. But we need something to show there that he can get through a torrid fight and come out on top. You've got Michael Hunter, who you said, whoever was the rankings that you said earlier, he was in at number 10. One defeat. Now, that was against Usyk in cruiserweight. It's a good, I think it was about 11th round. I think Usyk caught up with him. He's doing well as a heavyweight, but there's just nothing exceptional. Nothing against Michael Hunter, because he seems a really nice chap. But there's just nothing there, which, there's nothing. Okay, who has he beaten? There's nobody there really on the record. It's not even a case of really anybody. No, there's nobody there on the record. His punching power at heavyweight is going to cost him dearly when he goes up with one of the top guys. Yes, he did have a draw, and a lot of people did say that he should have won the fight when he faced Povetkin. a bit of promise there. Top 10, probably about the right ranking for him, but there's just nothing there in any of these fighters. Ortiz is knocking back fights that are being given to him and they're just being declined, and he's probably, was he officially 42 going on 52, whichever one it is. There's just nothing. There's no depth. There's nobody with a resume in these rankings at the moment. And it dawned on me when we had the conversation the other day when we come away from the win, obviously against Wilder with Fury. I was suckered in for just about 48 hours, then calmed down while walking around Lidl. The penny did drop, and then suddenly, hold on a second, whoa, no. And I've seen the fight, and I've watched it again because I only watched the highlights again. Watch the fight, look at the quality of punches, and as like you said earlier, it is like, okay, it's harsh, it's exaggerated to prove the point, but it is like barroom brawling. It's like technique has gone out the window. So when you look at technique going out the window and you say, well, how else are you going to do against Lennox Lewis? Really? Yeah, that's a foregone conclusion. But that is this Mark II Fury. Again, that Mark I was a great fighter, would have given anybody, he will hold his own with anybody in history, or beat them, but it would be by points. But you can't expect a knockout against anybody top tier because of when you're boxing like that, you cannot punch effectively as per his record up until going in with Sugarhawk Stewart. It's a funny game, especially heavyweights, because how you can go up and down and be in the same division. But Fury, just going back to that, I can only sound boring, repetitive. I'm so curious about what's going to happen. I think you're going to get one fight, but I think whoever he fights, you will know who's going to win the bout on the day of the weigh-in.
And to Big T's point, one of my favorites, Jared Anderson out of the United States. Big Baby's his name.
Absolutely.
In the future, talking about skill set and physique, the fact that he's big and he can move and he can hit with power.
As it appears against a stationary target, and this is what you've got to be careful with. We're basing all this, and it's like with Hrgovic and the others. It's based on potential. We've got nothing tangible at all to work with, unfortunately, which is why it's all sort of, resume, there's nothing there. You've got nothing tangible to work with these guys. Efia Jagba and Frank Sanchez, when they went into each other, I'm glad they did, but when weighing up who was going to win that fight, how could you really work out? Because neither of them before any names. So how could you work out? You can't. Flip a coin, really. It's all about potential until they've been in a fight with somebody towards the top who's in their prime. Not somebody who's a former champion from 10 years ago and age 40 something. You cannot gauge in that way whatsoever.
And I think a good example of this upcoming is the Dillian Whyte Otto Wallin fight. That's a super good example of what we're actually talking about.
But the only problem with that is, as I said, Wallin, is he bolstered by maybe a bad Fury display? And I think, again, we're going to find out that question on October.
Right. Just throwing it out there. But that's a good example. We've talked about it before. We need to unclog, if you will, the heavyweight division, allow some of these younger guys to move up. That's not why I was suggesting that Deontay Wilder should retire, by the way. I think he should retire because of health reasons. But again, unclogging that upper five, if you will, and moving on. So that the Dillian Whyte factor comes into play. And if he gets beaten by Wallin, then that unclogs the division somewhat. But anyway, that's what I...
Absolutely. But we've still got the merry-go-round at the top. Whichever way, go back to our early discussions. We're looking forward to it. It's going to answer so many questions, and it's going to happen, and it's going to unclog things. And no, okay, we got half. we got half of what we wanted. We wanted Wilder and Usyk to win, just purely to unclog. But with all the different variables with who, if Wilder would have won this, that, and the other, I don't think it would have unclogged anyway, because Wilder would have had to have fought the winner of Whyte versus Wallin, but then he would have wanted surely then to fight one of the others for an all British or for all the belts or whatever. Yeah. You've got this tangled mess with AJ, who is rematching Usyk, because that the rematch clause was fired off, and that's in motion now. You know, you've got Joe Joyce, who's now mandatory number one. Joe Joyce, actually, strange thing, just a sideline. He's got no, I don't know how it's working. I was just about to say he has no manager at the moment because Sam Jones isn't working as a manager. He's working for Probellum, or whatever the company is put together by Richard Schaefer. Sam Jones has left S-Jam Boxing. So it's not, so I guess it's still going to be then S-Jam Boxing, but I can't remember who the chap is that works there. But no, you've got, going back to points, sorry, you've got, he's waiting. He's WBO mandatory. Yep. But then if Wallin wins, he's going to be the number one WBC, and he's going to want to fight. It's still clogged. And it would be just lovely to see, like you had with the Effie Jabber, with Frank Sessions fight, some of these top guys fighting, so we can actually see how they are and what they can actually do instead of basing this whole thing with potential. But Jared Anderson, yes, he looks like one of the shining ones that are coming through. Can he take a punch? Can he continue doing what he does with somebody else firing back at him with evil intent? We don't know. That's what we've got to find out. But certainly looking the part, he ticks. He this is choosing the words correctly. He seems to tick the boxes. So fair play, you know, because putting everything in context, as much as I think he's good, that guy he fought, though he was unbeaten with a draw, he was very inactive, effectively part-time, and he was very static. And he was never going to win that fight. That was done to, you know, an unbeaten. That was done to bolster Anderson's record. But it doesn't mean Anderson isn't very good, because he does look the best prospects out there for sure. Absolutely. That's it.
Right.
But Lennox Lewis, all the way for me.
There we go. Okay.
So with that in mind, tomorrow, let's see who we're going to talk about then.
Yeah, we will see. We'll see what pops into our brains between now and then. Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments and your insight, as always. Thank you, boxing fans. Thank you, Big D, for joining us once again. And Kristian, we'll see you tomorrow.
Absolutely. Take care.
Cheers.